So, welcome back to American Textbook Reading. I'm Brian Stewart, and today we're going to talk about working for justice. Have you ever heard of someone that works for justice? Justice is actually the peace. If there is no justice, then there is no peace. So, today we'll mainly talk about today we're mainly talking about the heroes, which are, as you know, Rosa Parks. Here she is. Here she is. This is Rosa Parks. Here's her arm. Hiding something. Maybe she's hiding a key. This is a key or a knife. So today we're going to talk about Rosa Parks, and we're also going to talk about, as you know, have you ever heard of this man? Have you ever heard of this man? Have you ever heard of this man? As you know, this man is called Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is the most famous man in the world. Why was he famous? He was famous because of his actions. As you know, he gave many speeches. This is his hair, and here's his body. And that's his belly, and then that's where his arm will be. This is where his arm will be. So this is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You've heard of these two people. This is Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks. And this is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or Jr. Those are the people that every American school child knows about. These are the American people. They're usually famous. They're historic people. So today, now as you know, let's begin with the vocabulary section. The first word, as you know, we're going to talk about is justice. Justice. And here's the scale of justice. The scale of justice. You see that the two scales weigh just like each other. This is a man, and this is a child. They both weigh the same amount. That's why we call it justice. And the opposite of justice is injustice. 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 Injustice is like this. Suddenly, someone goes high up. This is a bunch of people. But this is a whole city of people. All crowded, 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 crowded. It's all crowded. And so it's not justice, but it's injustice. So that's why we call it justice and injustice. Justice is the opposite of injustice, and injustice is the opposite of justice. As you know, some people know that some people are actually treated unfairly, but some people are just like that. I have the freedom of speech, or the freedom of privacy, the freedom of speech, or other freedoms. Just like you are free from your parents' control or something. So now let's move on with the mini quiz. So our mini quiz is about working for justice. And as you know, we're going to talk about Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a famous man, and that man wanted the African Americans to be free from from the government's control. So he made peaceful marches and he made speeches to change the situation. Rosa Parks was also a woman, but Rosa Parks was a very important American woman, and Rosa Parks was a woman who bravely refused to give up her seat. And then actually, when she refused to give up her seat, she actually went to the bus. I think the story is she was tired, she was sleepy, and then she boarded the bus. Then she sat in the front for fresh air. But then suddenly another person, which is really a white person, came in. And that person seemed like he's angry. Do you know why? Because he said, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to sit in the back of the bus, and I'm supposed to sit in the front." So those are the laws, and it was really terrible. So a driver also mentioned it too. She said, "Hey." He said, "Hey, go to the back of the bus right now." And she said, "No." So the people looked at this and they saw this. So she was arrested. She was arrested because of those unpeaceful, just like that unpeaceful thing. But really, it's really peaceful. It's peaceful, not unpeaceful. Did you think that it's unpeaceful? So now, let's get started in how to speak against injustice. So now the first part, how to speak against injustice, is you need to read some newspapers. You need to read some newspapers. Read newspapers. Read newspapers. Read newspapers. You need to read newspapers. You need to write newspaper articles. You need to write newspaper articles. Newspaper articles are newspapers that usually give us information. Or sometimes they give us bad things. Just like they tell us, "You are a bad person." Or they tell us, "You are the criminal of the government." Or they'll say, "You are someone who kills others." Or they'll say, "You are someone who burns someone else's." Or even they say, "You are a stealer. You are a phone stealer. You are a light turnover." So there are many things that are bad about you. You didn't do them, but they think you did them. So they wrote it on. So now, that's the first step to read, to speak against justice, to read newspaper articles. To read newspaper articles are very important. Why? Because reading newspaper articles will make you think if it's injustice or justice. The next thing to do is to gather a lot of people. Just like you say, hey, hey, it's injustice. And then you cry to another people. It's injustice, cry to another person. It's injustice and cry to another couple. It's injustice, cry to another couple. It's injustice, and then they gather and gather and gather and gather together, holding their hands. And then they spoke quietly to make their plan. And then finally they will be marching with guns and swords on the street. Whoever touches them dies. They will be marching on the streets to make the people see their feelings. They will be angry. They will be sad. They will be upset. They will be crazy. Or also, they can be acting crazily. Just like they spin around, knocking off the injustice people. And sometimes even knock off the justice people. So that's why we fight against justice. Ting, 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 ting. Ting, 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 ting. And now finally, the last step is, as you know, I told you, the last step is to fight against others. The last step is to fight against others. And now, that's how you speak aloud against justice. Just like you speak out, hey, we don't want it anymore. You speak aloud against justice. You speak aloud against justice. You speak aloud against them. If you're wrong, they'll say you're wrong. If you're right, they say you're right. But actually, you are really right, not wrong. So that's why they usually don't believe in justice. And now, let's take a short break and come back and we'll do the speaking section. So don't go away. Hello again! So, now let's do the speaking section. The speaking section is about working for justice. Working for justice means we have to make peace. We'll work for the peace. So, just like if something is bad, you work. You work for the bad thing. And then, finally, you have peace. So when you work for the bad thing, such as you have a broken bus, you take off the wheel, you see it's broken, you pull the wheel, and then you fix the wheel with a wrench. They made you to fix it. So then they'll even be more glad and gladder and glad and glad and glad and glad and glad. Then they will let you have some justice. So that's what justice and injustice means. Justice and injustice means injustice means that something is not right and it's wrong to do. It's wrong to do. But justice is something that it's good to do. It's good to do and you like to do it. You like to do it. And that is called, as you know, it's called injustice. So, now, are you ready for the speaking section? I'm going to warn you some things. As you know, you have to speak along with me out loud, or you can just read in your thoughts. You will read in your thoughts, and then just like you will read along with me in your mind or out loud to practice the pronunciation of the vocabulary learned so far. So now let's begin with the speaking section. The speaking section is about, as you know, working for justice. Working for justice means that working for justice actually means that something is right or wrong to do. It's right, yeah, I want it. injustice means, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. I want to punch you. That's called injustice. So as you know, here's the scale. Here's a man with a shield and a sword. He is heavier than a man with no shield and sword. And now, this is really justice. Just like this is a tree or a Coca can, and this is a man on a big bench. They weigh at the same ounce. So this is justice, this is injustice. That's how you say it. So now, as you know, let's begin with the speaking section. Democracy, pronounce it with me, democracy is a type of peace, and people need to be treated equally and also need to be treated fairly. So they needed to be treated equally and they also need to be treated fairly. Two things. They need to be treated equally and they needed to be treated fairly. Not unfairly, like, hey, you're wrong, I'll punch your head. Ow, ow. That's called injustice. But if it's justice, you're nice. Then you say, hey, you're wrong. And then they'll apologize you and you give them one more chance and they will never do that again. So that's what injustice and justice mean. Injustice means that something is right or wrong to do, but justice means that something is really good to do or not really good to do. So that's how you focus on. So now, as you know, let's start. So before we start, as you know, you read along. Democracy is a kind of peace that people are treated fairly and equally. They're treated fairly and equally. In the United States, there was once a threat to justice. So people can gather together and speak aloud against justice. Hey, 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 hey. They can speak aloud in justice. They can speak aloud in justice. They speak aloud in justice, as you know. So when they speak aloud in justice, then they will have the ability to control their abilities. So, that's what injustice and justice means. So as you know, injustice means that something is right to do, and justice means that something is right to do. So now, let's continue with the speaking section. Facing such unfairness, the African Americans wanted to avenge themselves. They wanted to avenge themselves. So they stood up for their country. They'll stand up for their country, fighting and singing. They'll fight and shout. And they stood up for their country to protect themselves and also have some justice. But not too much. Because something will harm them, and then the people that are injustice and the really protective people will harm them. So that's why I say not too much justice. So now let's just continue it. People that are working for injustice and also justice, the people who are working on injustice and justice usually face many challenges. So that's a fact about justice and injustice. Justice and injustice are very important for our lives. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the famous leaders in the fight. He was the one who made speeches and made super good marches. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Then they'll march and 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 march, giving the other people their feelings. And then Finally, the people gave up and then they'll have justice. So that's the speaking section for today. And now let's do the speaking section question. There are two. The first speaking questions are, is Dr. Martin Luther King, what does Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. do? As you know, he does things like marching around the street or making speeches. And finally, I'm gonna ask you something about Rosa Parks. What is the skin color of Rosa Parks? It's a hint for you in this picture. So can you answer the critical question? Can you answer the critical question? As you know, the critical question of Rosa Parks is actually very interesting, and because it's very hard for us to identify Rosa Parks because now she's dead. She's arrested for 20 years, but she doesn't have any food, so he dies. So the skin color of Rosa Parks is actually brown, light brown. So now if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe me more at American Textbook Reading, Science and Social Studies, Form 1 to 4, and also remember to write my name, Brian Sturritt, and also, as you know, to write your favorite lesson. And you can see all of my amazing videos of me and the real Brian Sturritt videos. So now, see you in the next lesson. Take care, everybody. See you.